Getting started in here. All right, we're gonna go. You want it off now? Okay. All right, we'll get started here. This is August 24th. My name is Brian Lantz, here with LaRouche Pack in Houston, Texas. This is our regular Saturday afternoon briefing and class series. And we've been holding as well, many of you know, numerous other events, community events, and that will continue. So let me jump in here. We're in an escalating global crisis, which is not new in terms of its causes, but I believe it's only beginning to reach the American people, the seriousness of this. Probably the biggest indication that kind of is jumping out at people now is the escalating trade conflict between the United States and China, in which President Trump is now tweeting using the word enemy to describe President Xi Jinping of China, the same man that only really weeks ago he was calling his friend. There's been a series of tariffs, new tariffs imposed with the escalation coming from the U.S. side, and Trump issuing demands that U.S. companies pull out of China, come back to the U.S. or go to other countries, but, quote, we'd be better off without them, meaning without China. So that, I think, has kind of caught people's attention. And, of course, the stock markets have been a roller coaster and generally down and on and on. Not that that means a lot, the stock markets in and of themselves. But you also have, connected to that, you have the other elements of the strategic picture, and then I'll get to the actual substance, which is we have Hong Kong, which is feeding the U.S.-China apparent conflict, a conflict that's being orchestrated from the city of London. But it also involves very much a certain faction, the neoconservative faction in and around the White House, a thin reed of a network of people that have positioned themselves. And the role of Mike Pence, Pompeo, as our Secretary of State now, John Bolton, the Congress, many in the Congress, Democrat as well as Republican, the National Endowment for Democracy that's moved millions of dollars into Hong Kong, supporting the so-called pro-democracy movement that involves rioters and what they call petrobomb, what we know as Molotov cocktails. I mean, this has escalated the entire situation. Then you have Kashmir, the conflict now escalating around that between India and Pakistan, which China is trying to play a role in mediating, among others, Russia. Trump may get involved in that. But all of these conflicts have really gone off, really dangerous fireworks, like fireworks being set off inside a closed building, just in the matter of the last couple of weeks. And in the case of the tariff conflict escalation, of course, that's occurred in just the last couple of days. Now, there's also the withdrawal from the INF Treaty and the U.S. test of the cruise missile just immediately following, which, as President Vladimir Putin of Russia, just yesterday stated to his Security Council that clearly this had to have been planned, this rocket had to have been being developed long before the official withdrawal from the INF Treaty. In other words, that this is part of a broader scheme afoot. Again, this coming from London, from the Anglo-American elite, which is centered in the city of London, the royal family, and the neoconservative networks on this side that share obedience to that idea of a unipolar world order, a single Anglo-American empire. So these are elements in this that are escalating simultaneous. Now, underneath this, what our analysis as of the moment is, and we're trying to get more. Absolutely, we will get more on what is going on. What caused Trump to make this shift that he has over the recent days vis-a-vis China, but also some of these other developments. You might have seen that there was some proposal by the Trump administration, a proposal to perhaps buy Greenland from Denmark. Apparently there's minerals there, anyway, whatever. I mean, there's just a lot of quirky stuff as well going on. So we're trying to get a better picture of the shift that's going on in the Trump administration. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, emphasized today that what is happening now is going in absolutely the wrong direction. This is going away from a four powers agreement, the potential of the U.S., Russia, China, and India coming together, right, to initiate a new Bretton Woods agreement, to negotiate a new financial system for the world. And now, at this moment, we're going away from that, and it's very dangerous. So we'll have more to say on this, and we'll make that available on the LaRouche PAC website, and otherwise it'll be available, I'm sure, on the Executive Intelligence Review website, which is larouchepub.com, and you can obviously call our office to get updates and to make contributions. So underneath this crisis and the threat to the potential of a new Bretton Woods goes to this, is the emerging global financial blowout. We'll come back in a little bit to LaRouche's triple curve, Lyndon LaRouche's triple curve that he developed back in the 1990s, to just pedagogically lay out with clarity what the process of a collapse, of financial collapse is, and how it occurs. But the nub of the matter is that there was no resolution of the 2007, 2008, 2009 financial crisis. There was a massive bailout to the tune of $30, $40 trillion to bail out banks on both sides of the Atlantic, to keep financial values, asset values elevated, and to sustain the existing bubble, financial bubble. And now we have the everything bubble. And you know some of it yourself. You've heard about student loan debt, which is over $1 trillion. You've heard about car loan debt, probably. That's a big bubble as well. All these people driving new cars are not, it's not because they can afford them, you know. And now there's beginning a new housing bubble with mortgages subprime. They use a different term now, but essentially subprime mortgages now becoming coming into currency. But at the core of it is the global financial derivatives bubble, somewhere over $1.4 quadrillion in the global financial markets. This is where the money of Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citibank, Chase, etc., your money deposited in your local bank account, that's where that money is going as in terms of investment, so-called investment. It's going into a casino mondial, as we've called it in the past, a global casino. And that overall is the bubble that will detonate. It almost detonated in 2008. We kicked the can down the road. Americans sacrificed enormously, the world sacrificed enormously to keep that bubble afloat. I mean, in physical terms, in terms of employment, in terms of housing, etc. But now we're at the point of that bubble blowing out. And how do we measure that? Well, we can measure that first by the eruption of these crises simultaneously at home and abroad, including the New York Times announcing that they're shifting from Russiagate, because that was chapter one and that didn't work out so well, to now playing the race card against Trump. this is another feature of the same escalation, right, of tensions, a strategy of tension globally. But it's also shown at the meeting that just occurred, that's just wrapping up today in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is the annual meeting of the Federal Reserve, sponsored by the Kansas City Federal Reserve, but it's the Federal Reserve's annual summit on economic policy, the annual Economic Policy Symposium, it's called. And what was presented there, first of all, by Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, he kept it in simple terms and without much detail and without much content. I don't know what there is in terms of content between his ears either, but he kept it very simple. He said that we need a new normal, and talked about interest rates going towards zero, that's where we're going to be basically pinned down to. More to the point was Mark Carney, the head of the Bank of England, who spoke on Thursday in the evening following Powell. And what Carney laid out, and we'll have more details on this, but what Carney laid out was a proposal to create a new global, essentially cryptocurrency, modeled somewhat on the Libra proposal that's been floated by Facebook. That now we now need to go to a new global currency above other currencies. And of course, those that control this currency in terms of decision making will then control investment. Now, what's kind of the content of that? Go to the proposal that was just put forward for the Wyoming meeting of the Fed by BlackRock. BlackRock is the largest asset management company in the world. It has over $3 trillion in assets, and its board of directors reads like a who's who of former central bankers. BlackRock, their team of experts, put forth a proposal for a standing emergency fiscal facility. What is required? What is required? I'm sure you'll recognize the importance of this to your daily life. What is required is a new financial mechanism above governments, above the U.S. government, run by the central banks, specifically in the case of the U.S., the Fed, obviously working in coordination with people like Mark Carney and so on and so forth. What this facility would operate on the basis of is the central bank simply printing lots of money and giving it to the government to spend. Just simply printing money and giving it to governments to spend. And the facility, the standing emergency fiscal facility, is the people that would make the decisions appointed by the central banks, would make the decisions as to what that money could be spent on. And what is the content of the policies of BlackRock and others of this ilk these days? Well, they're all tied up in climate change finance activity. Larry Fink, who's the current CEO of BlackRock, not to be mixed up with Blackstone, but BlackRock, you can look it up. Blackstone is currently engaged in an operation along with the Rhodium Group to do a complete climate change risk involving investments in U.S. municipal bonds, electrical utilities, commercial real estate, literally property by property across the United States. Doing risk analysis, property by property, of the threat of extreme heat waves, wildfires, floods, extreme storms, and fossil fuel facilities, producing energy from fossil fuel, will be automatically put in the high risk category, because that's a risk to the high risk to the environment. Now, obviously, if you shut down those facilities, it's going to be a high risk to everybody living in the area. They're not going to have any energy, and that's something we're already finding out again about in Texas, because we're having coal-fired plants shut down, and now we're facing, the upper limits of what the system can produce here in the middle of the summer. But this is what's going on. Is the idea here is to funnel these investments, funnel these funds out of this, through this facility. This, I always keep forgetting the term. It's one of these terms that's made to not stand out. Standing Emergency Fiscal Facility will move money into green investments while forcing investments out of every other area of the productive economy. If you think that's abstract, think back. Some of you know this from living through it. Starting in 1979 with Paul Volcker, interest rates in the country went to over 20%. Right? And the policy was, as enunciated by Project 1980s, or the 1980 project of the Council on Foreign Relations, was to go to control disintegration of the U.S. economy. It was not China that stole American jobs. It was American financiers who said, oh, we can make lots of money by simply not investing here at home and shipping all this production requirements abroad, and let somebody else finance the production of them. And we'll just rake this money off the top. And so they shut down the physical economy of the United States. So you could say that was stage one. Well, now they're going to the next stage, right? They're going to shut down what's left, which means everybody, including those in the service economy, are going to see their money go to basically go to nothing. So this is I hope at least I've given you some sense of this. Mark Carney calls his new currency. This is the head of the Carney, Mark Carney. I have an old friend, Mark Carney, a good man. So I'm sorry to mix the two up. But Mark Carney, his currency, he's called it the synthetic hegemonic currency, or hegemonic synthetic currency, HSC. Either way, you get the idea. This is this grand scheme put forward at the Federal Reserve Symposium, there in Wyoming over the last 3 days. This is where the bankers are going. This is what LaRouche warned of as Shaktian economics. Lyndon LaRouche warned of this back in the 1960s, late 1960s going into the 70s, that if there was not a reorganization of the financial system on the basis of real productive value, a Hamiltonian, we would say today, Hamiltonian reorganization of the financial system, and national credit for real production to rebuild the physical economy, that what would be adopted would be the economic policies of Adolf Hitler's finance minister, Hjalmar Schacht. And that's what's being implemented here in terms of just printing press operations. In Germany, that's what financed the rebuilding of the war machine. But that's what's being promoted. So that's on one side of the agenda. That's the enemy's agenda. Our agenda is to go in the opposite direction. So we can come back to some of this in the discussion, but I wanted to give at least a framework for now discussing, again, picking up on what we've been discussing over the last several weeks, Project Artemis, the new U.S. space program to go to the moon by 2024 and a permanent presence on the moon by 2028 and on to Mars from there. This was announced back in April by President Trump. It's the initiated policy of the United States. But you should ask yourself at the same time the question, what if President Kennedy had given his speech at Rice University and it had not been covered by the press? I mean, effectively, no coverage is being given outside of the science community, I would say, and the science nerd community, to the announcement of this grand project for the United States, which is not going to be a small project. So let's go to the first slide there. Okay. We've now released a pamphlet. I'm sorry, I didn't bring one up here to the front with me, but this is the new pamphlet we've released. It's available as a PDF online. It's available in print as well, a limited run, and we'll keep trying to print it as much as possible, but it takes you through. Here's the pamphlet here. I'm holding it up if you can switch back here so they can see it here briefly for a minute. We commit to the Moon-Mars mission, the true spark for changing the culture. And it includes the national petition for support of the Trump-LaRouche Moon-Mars mission project. And what we're going to be discussing today are elements of Project Artemis, which is to launch the SLS, the first one, which is almost completed, we're told. To launch the SLS in a series of missions leading up to 2024, and the mission to the moon, to the gateway, which will have to be assembled beforehand in the orbit of the moon, to then land a lander on the moon, and the first man and woman in 50 years will step foot onto the face of the moon in 2024. That's the plan. That's a schematic of the projects. Artemis 1, the first trip around the moon. Secondly, the first humans to go around the moon, and so forth, leading up to the 2024 landing.
March 2020?
I'm sorry?
March 2020? What is that?
I don't know.
Oh.
I can't see it from here.
Okay.
I'm going to keep moving here.
Go ahead.
So this is a NASA perspective for the integrated exploration package from 2019 to 2024. This is, I don't know if you can see this clearly or not, this is 39 separate missions, launches in the course of 5 years. This is an enormous project. As Jim Bridenstine, the director of NASA, has emphasized, and Trump has emphasized in the past, we need international cooperation to make this work. And we have initial European cooperation in the actual construction of the SLS, specifically the Orion, and the Orion portion of the SLS. And of course, Russia, we wouldn't even be able to get to the space station without Russia, so without the Soyuz. So we already have international cooperation, but as opposed to going to conflict and war, which is what's on the on the agenda at the moment, the danger we're looking at today, we need to go in the direction of space cooperation. This is why Project Artemis is, in that sense, the medicine required to end this disease of geopolitics and war, which London and the neocons are attempting to throw us off course with. Here is LaRouche's triple curve. I think I want to emphasize the bottom one, because what I'm going to be discussing now is a Space Civilian Conservation Corps. This is another feature, a critical feature, in some form that's going to have to be carried out to actually carry out America's and the world's exploration of the solar system. We have to transform our workforce. Much of our workforce has not existed in any tangible way in terms of production of physical value since the 1990s or even 1980s, with the shutting down of our Midwest industry, which was turned into the Rust Belt, as they called it, and so on. The blue is that collapse of physical output, inputs and outputs per capita, per hectare, in terms of area, the just total collapse of physical output. And of course, those outputs are the result of inputs, and if you don't have one, you don't have the other. Secondly, you have the yellow. I'll come back to that in a second. And in the red, that upper hyperbolic curve to the is the financial aggregates. And where we are today is right at that breaking point where the value of the financial aggregates that have been skyrocketing over these years, skyrocketing on the basis of the looting of the underlying physical economy of the United States, where that once again, as in 2000, 2008, it's reaching a breaking point, a singularity, and a collapse. And what you have with Mark Kelly Carney of the Bank of England, what we have with BlackRock and these ilk is a decision. We're going to turn on the printing presses like mad. We're going to escalate that yellow curve. We're going to keep pushing it up there because we've got to inflate asset values. We got to hold up these values to hold together this financial system, as at the same time we're attempting to corral all available cash into our green projects, right? Where we're going to try to corral enough to hold on to power. But the overall point is that this is a single unified process here. The collapse of the physical economy driving this hyperbolic process of the inflation of financial values and printing press operations. This is Shaktian economics. And of course this process will drive the overall physical productive process further down into the ground if it's allowed to continue. We have to shatter this, which means we don't have to just turn that blue curve, you know, kind of back around and start working our way, slowly eking our way back out of the hole. We have to put, as LaRousse's 4 laws call for, we have to, one, use Glass-Steagall to put the financial system into bankruptcy reorganization. We have to wipe out large amounts of those so-called financial aggregates which have no real value. We have to bring monetary supply not only under control, but we've got to redirect currency in the new form through a national bank in the form of national credit back into the real economy to jumpstart a massive transformation of the U.S. economy back into a high-tech, manufacturing, science-oriented economy contributing to the world and to the future of our children and children's children. That's what we're going to have to accomplish. And that's something that we know that Trump is certainly capable of responding to. Congress, that's another question. As has been emphasized in the last couple of days, the American people, we the American people, you as a member of the American citizenry, you're going to have to help scare the hell out of the Congress to force them under these conditions of crisis to implement the 4 basic measures, very much like what FDR did in the 1930s to rebuild the U.S. economy. And at the core of that, the 4th law is the need to revive science around a science driver of fusion and fusion energy development, a crash program for fusion, and the science program correlated with it. Now, this is just part of what we're dealing with. I mean, people don't even know are vaguely aware. I mean, much of the Midwest, the Missouri River area, the farm areas have been wiped out over the course of this last winter and spring and continues to be in horrific conditions. We're not talking about problems somewhere else in the world. We're talking about here in our own backyard. And if you remember, this is just, you know, this is 2017. This was Harvey, right? Hurricane Harvey. Before and during, right? Before and during photos there side by side. So this is New York City. This is the state of much of New York City's urban transportation system. You know, its transit system. This railroad car was built somewhere back in the 1930s, I believe. Yeah, it's believed to be the oldest, or one of the oldest, operating urban trains in the world. You know, now this is the other problem we got. That young lady or girl in the center of the picture is Greta Thunberg. Green Greta. You know, this victim of child abuse who's been put in the front. I mean, you can just look at her eyes. Put in the front of this the so-called green movement, including the Fridays for the Future, which she personally heads. She's surrounded there by members of a German eco-fascist group that's holed up in the woods in Germany. That's why the lady on your left is wearing a mask and so forth. But this is the eco-fascist movement. which are the stormtroopers for BlackRock and for Mark Carney and this whole crew. This is another problem because it's not only them, it's that these ideas have seeped into our politics and into our culture. Excuse me. And then we have this problem, all right? You know, we've got, you know, generations that have succumbed to the smartphone, so-called. And we have tremendous unemployment in the country. This is Chicago, just a single picture, but I mean, you can take these pictures anywhere, in any area, black, white, blue collar, former blue collar. We have a tremendous, we have right now in July, we have somewhere over 2.5 million unemployed males between the ages of 17 and 24. You know, over 1.5 million of them are seriously looking for work. But that doesn't even begin to touch the fact that we have a tremendous problem of underemployment. You know, it's estimated, there's different figures. Let me see if I can catch up with my notes here. But this is the best figures I could get. I'm sure there's better that could be found, but a 2012 Gallup poll found that 32% of 18 to 29-year-olds in the U.S. workforce are underemployed. 32%. Now, we would put that figure much higher. This is considered an example of real employment. I think I found this photograph in the Wall Street Journal, and they were promoting how employment is looking up for youth. The point is that we have entirely different, more profound requirements, and we'll come to that. Now, we've dealt with this problem before. Young men, hobos in the 1930s. Roosevelt addressed this then, and this is coming to the meat of what I wanted to talk about today, you know, in the context of this strategic crisis. Roosevelt, you know, launched in 1932 what became the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And along with it, side by side with it, was the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. I'm going to focus on the CCC because what we're proposing for discussion is the need for a Space CC, a Civilian Conservation Corps today. The CCC camps, this is a picture of one of them, were conservation work oriented. And that was because Roosevelt, to gain the support of labor, said, well, they'll just be involved in simple work. People were not dragooned into the CCC. You had to be already on some form of relief. Most people today don't even realize that people were on relief, on the dole, through state programs funded in part by the federal government, had been for years. The whole idea of the Roosevelt administration coming in was to get rid of the dole and get people back to productive work for all the reasons that would be indicated by that. And the CCC involved education and book learning, literacy. Over 25,000 youth were taught to, illiterate youth were taught to read and write in the course of their programs. Here's Morse code and radio work being done. Limbs, experienced workers were brought and hired, 8 of them per camp. There was 2,600 camps. 8 limbs were hired for each camp that taught masonry, carpentry, other skills to these young men. Limbs, that was the acronym for them, LEMS.
What does it stand for?
Experienced men. Okay, there we go. Local experienced men. Okay, as well as teachers. Starting about 3 years into the program, teachers were hired for these facilities all over the country. To give you some idea, they in terms of what they accomplished, just to summarize it, there was over 3 million people went through the program, young men, roughly 300,000 at a time. They were employed for 1.5 years apiece. They accomplished. They built 700 state parks, assembled 40,000 bridges, carried out soil conservation work across the country for farmers in particular, planted 3.5 billion trees, including shelter belts of trees throughout the Dust Bowl area. This is just to give you an idea of some of what they accomplished. Now, if we were, and these are the larger projects then that were built parallel to this, the Works Progress building, administration building the TVA and building larger projects. WPA was for already skilled unemployed workers, semi-skilled workers. Now to do this today, let me just come back. To do this today, a couple of things. One is the scale. We had about 16 million young men and women in the country at the time of the Depression. We have twice that number, more than twice that number now. So what are we talking about? We're talking about at least doubling the program from 3 million to 6 million. That 3 million was over the course of 9 years. So you'd be talking at least about doubling it. More so if you include women. You know, in parallel or compatible programs, but that's something we would seriously want to consider in some form today. But also there's the question of unemployment and underemployment in the United States. What's the requirement today? What do we actually have in terms of a situation? Well, for example, we've got right now somewhere around, this is a rough figure, again because these figures are a little bit dated, but we have roughly somewhere around 800,000 young adults in jails and prisons in the United States. That's between the ages of 18 and 29. That's the best figures I could find. But that's 800,000 in jails and prisons. And a lot of those young men and women are not there because they did something, you know, heinous. These are people that need to be absolutely absorbed productively into the workforce. For their own sake, but also for the sake of the nation. We have, as I said already, we have 32% at least. That's a very, if you think in terms of real value, LaRouche's concept of value, value being what is the contribution that the individual is making to the future productivity, measured in terms of increasing potential population density, right, and increasing energy flux density. What is the value being contributed by the activity of the individual in question? One can surmise that virtually all of the work done by young men and women today in the country, outside of the fields of science, say, and technology, is underemployment. So the need there, in terms of millions of jobs, is pressing. So we're talking about a CCC program that would be 2 or 3 times as large, at least, as the CCC camps of the 1930s. Again, we'd be talking about something, whether you called them camps or you gave them another name, they would be located near work sites. Going back, what kind of work sites are we talking about? Well, we're talking about these kinds of work sites and these kinds of work sites. We're talking about what are we going to have to build to actually not just restore, but upgrade the infrastructure of the United States, as the CCC and WPA contributed in their own way. And we have the model briefly, just in terms of China. This is just Shanghai. This is the train station. These are all high-speed rail trains lined up there. I mean, this is a small fraction of the total number at any one time in the stations. But China has transformed its economy in the matter of less than 2 generations. So, you know, how do they do it? Here's China's space program. They're on the backside of the moon. How did they do it? You know, so the question, China's reaching into Africa. The trains are being built there. Why aren't we building new trains systems in the United States? If they're doing it in Africa, we can do it here. We should be able to do it here. That was the scheme for Africa's rail and highway development and so forth that the African Union has in the works in conjunction with China and other nations. LaRouche's Economics, this is his textbook from back in the 1980s, which is still in print through Amazon. You can get it. My car assures me of that. So You Wish to Learn All About Economics, a text of elementary mathematical economics by Lyndon H. LaRouche. It's available there. Utilizing these methods, which are the updated Hamiltonian methods, we can accomplish now the kind of upgrading of our young workforce that's required to bring it into the Artemis generation, to make it fully part of the Artemis generation, both through the building of basic infrastructure and by the transformation of a new generation of youth in terms of moving them into science and technology and other productive areas of the economy, medicine, education, and so forth. These are young children working on a additive 3D production apparatus. And I'm bringing you back to this because, I mean, this is Texas, right? Some of you are familiar with this. This is just a topological map of Texas. You can see the green, and the deeper the green, high points of the water during Hurricane Harvey. All of these rivers were initially planned to have multiple dams on them. Every one of the Sabine, you name it, all of them, dams that were never built. Those dams need to be built as part of an actual durable infrastructure, water infrastructure, flood control, etc. system in conjunction with what has to be done in places like Houston proper. And projects like this to build a seawall, coastal spine, surge barrier, there you go, to prevent water, elevated water from hurricanes that can lift the water levels up 40 or 50 feet to prevent that water from coming back in as it did before with Hurricane Ike and so forth. So all of these projects need to be built. So we're talking about siting CCC camps in these projects. Now before, CCC projects did simple work. That was the term used by Roosevelt. It didn't conflict with, you know, the work of regular labor. We're going to have to figure out a way to coordinate and collaborate simply because of the demand of what's required. We need millions of young men and women. We need them as productive collaborators in the work. And each one of these camps is going to be coordinated with these limbs, these skilled workers, many of them who are exactly the kind of people you need to interface with contractors and so forth on these big projects. You know, to figure out how young men and women can fit into a reconstruction process. The training is going to be a lot different. You're probably leaping to that. We don't move a lot with picks and shovels anymore. We move with, you know, with power machinery. How quickly can we train operators of equipment, train up a very young workforce, scraped off the streets of urban cities, ghettos, and so forth, but also out of the dust of rural areas? How quickly can we train them up? So that's going to be a feature, but that's something we're going to have to figure out. And there's going to be a lot of on-the-job training as a necessary feature of this. This is, again, flooding in the... and this is the kind of thing we need to build out. This goes back to the work of Richard Freeman and our good friend Hal Cooper, Dr. Hal Cooper, the engineer. Their plan that they drew up over a decade ago, I think almost 2 decades ago, for the development of a two-tier rail system of high-speed rail and then maglev to cover the country of the United States, something like 42,000 miles of high-speed and maglev rail. This is the kind of project otherwise that we can fold a young labor force into in terms of training, in terms of camps, and so on. Likewise with nuclear energy and power plants, also gas, coal plants. We're going, as Ben Denniston was emphasizing the other day, I believe there was an update, we got a memo on that in the last day or two. The requirements, for building plants, we're going to need gas. We're going to need coal-fired plants. We only have a capacity to produce about 20 nuclear power plants a year right now in the world. We have to massively upgrade that. While we're upgrading that capacity to produce 20 or 30 nuclear power, to upgrade that to producing hundreds, we've got to have power to build the power. So we've got to have the expansion of these power plants as well. But just to underscore it, if you're talking about tripling the number of manufacturing jobs in the United States, I mean, how are we going to produce high-speed rail on a 42,000-mile system? How are you going to rebuild New York City's urban transit? How are we going to make the greater Houston Gulf region hurricane-proof? And you can go on with the projects. How are we going to make the Missouri River? What's going to be required to make the Missouri River flood-proof for agricultural production and so forth? This is going to require an enormous amount of energy. So if we triple the manufacturing capacity in the United States to give us the productive capacity, we're also going to need the workforce for that. The productive capacity, the manufacturing capacity, we're talking about needing another 200 gigawatts of electricity. These are the figures that Jason Ross had come up with a few months back, as a working figure for approximation purposes here. So if we're talking about 200 gigawatts, that's 200 nuclear power plants or 300 gas turbine plants, and you're talking about perhaps 3,500 people to construct each of those plants. So again, you get the idea, without belaboring the details, you get the idea that you're talking about an enormous expansion of the productive workforce that's required. Now, let me get to the other feature of the situation, which is that we're probably going to need a second tier. This is the idea I'm putting out there. We're going to need a second tier, simultaneous, a parallel or overlapping, if you want to think about that, or tandem program that's going to simultaneously, as we're taking the people out of prisons and jails, we're taking them off the street, the untrained, the unskilled, the impoverished. We're putting them into CCC space program, and so forth. Simultaneously, we need to take the young men and women that are coming out of schools, high school, they've got their high school degrees, or they got a GED, or maybe they're even already in college. The figures that I got from on college was that this is according to the New York Federal Reserve in 2017. 1 in 3 college graduates are underemployed. They're working at a job that has nothing to do with the degree they got and the money that was spent and so on and so forth to get that degree. Right? And a huge percentage, those just coming out of college, the percentage is even higher, 44%. So a lot of those people are also labor potential to be upgraded in terms of their value, their contribution, their importance, a role to play. Now, there's been a lot of talk, and there's been programs launched and so forth since about 2001 in what's called STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM programs. And some of our teachers know something about this. And this has been promoted all over the country. A lot of pizzazz, a lot of, different elements to the thing. This started in about the time that Lyndon LaRouche was coming out of prison. I mean, it was like Lynn had presented the triple curve back in the 1990s, all right? He wasn't listened to. Despite his record as a forecaster, he was not listened to. But by 2001, lo and behold, it was catching up with the country. What was catching up? That blue curve going down, the physical collapse of the economy. We were losing our workforce. Here's from the Aerospace Industry Association. You get the idea, aerospace. It's the big umbrella group for aerospace companies. This is from their report in 2016. A highly skilled and robust defense industry and aerospace workforce is essential to our nation's security and economic prosperity. Anyway, you get the idea. Okay, here's some figures from the report. Tracking to the country's aging population, current statistics describe what has been called a bow wave of pending aerospace and defense industry retirements. Otherwise, they refer to it as a tsunami, okay? In 2015, 18% of all U.S. aerospace engineers and 24% of all hourly manufacturing employees in the aerospace industry were eligible for retirement. It is predicted that 41% of skilled tradesmen in the aerospace industry will retire by 2017. That was 2 years ago. Boeing, for example, employs 14,000 workers over age 61, and 56% of the company's engineers are 50 years old or older. Replacing these workers, say experts, will take 10 to 20 years. You want to understand the Boeing 737 MAX problems? You know, I mean, in terms of the systemic cause of that kind of problem. So what they call for, quote, a retooling of the nation's education system to generate more qualified STEM graduates. The challenges aren't purely academic. Well, here's Aviation Week's 2015 workforce study reveals valuable insights. Not only why schools aren't preparing more job-ready workers, but also why many graduates who enter the STEM workforce leave after a few years. The underrepresentation of diverse populations in the aerospace and defense industry also carries with it a real cost in terms of the STEM talent deficit and growth opportunities left on the table. In other words, we're not recruiting minorities, right? And we're not keeping the people that we're training. They're leaving. These young people are leaving after a few years at a high rate. This is, again, where Project Artemis comes in. As Lynn said years ago, I think we played, Keisha played a tape of Lynn last week for our event. People may want to go back to and watch that short clip again. Lynn spoke of firing the imaginations. That's the critical element here. That's why there's a blackout, you know, of the media of Project Artemis as the announced program of NASA to put men and women on the moon within 5 years, to gear up to get that done. Right? We're out to fire the imaginations of the American people. If you fire the imaginations once again, as Kennedy initiated with his speeches to the Congress and at Rice University, right, and we carried forward, we can bring men and women back into the productive workforce in a way that we can't right now, or that we're having trouble with right now. But I'd also add that this American Aerospace Industries Association report is not about manpower for a rebuilding of American infrastructure, of reversing that blue curve and bringing it upward fast in terms of physical inputs and outputs. It's simply about maintaining what they've got. So what's required is far beyond that. So the second tier of what we're going to require is a massive program to bring men and women in high schools and so forth into the productive workforce. Men and women that otherwise would be going into clerical, going into, you know, services, restaurant waiters and so on and so forth, and bring them into actually jobs in the skilled workforce. I'm not talking about college graduates. I'm talking about those that are coming out of high school but have the capability to become machinists, skilled welders, electricians, and so forth. And in this area, what used to be considered dirty work, yeah, it's still considered dirty work, yes. Yeah, a friend of ours you know, who works in the area, said this is one of the biggest problem. Young people, getting people over the hump, as he said, and into training programs, like at Houston Community College, is they think that being a machinist is a dirty job, and that's hardly. This is here is HCC High Speed HCC Advanced Manufacturing Center for Excellence there at Stafford, and that's the facility, and this is what a machine shop looks like today. You know, it's CNC machine tools. It's advanced equipment. This is the fabrication laboratory there at HCC, where people can bring projects from the private sector. They don't charge a dime. A guy can walk in, an engineer from some company with some prototype that he's designed, and they'll work with him to produce it for free. They don't charge him anything. You know, it can also just be some kid coming off the street. If he's got you know, basically a program-ready prototype, people like this gentleman will turn it into help him or her turn it into reality. Here is, you know, some more equipment. This is another picture of their machine training facility. I think I'm about out there on that. I'll just go back. I'll leave that one up there. No, it's moving on its own. That's fine. But machine shops, you know, it's high skilled. It's a 2-year program. You got to learn calculus. You learn physics. You learn material science. Before you even get near it, you got to start learning programming. Before you even get near a CNC machine tool, that is a computer-controlled, numerically controlled machine tool, the teachers want you to work with manual machine tools first, because you got to learn the material that you're working with. You got to learn your tools. As described, the machines and the materials talk to you, and you got to listen. You know, if you start screwing up, you're going to hear it. You're going to feel it. You know, if you're working a manual machine tool, right? And so you've got to master, you know, those tools first and those materials first before they can move you up. You know, you're going to be learning other things along the way. You're going to be working and taking other classes in science and so forth. But you're going to be working with these basic machine tools first of all. We've got about 380,000 machinists in the United States right now. A tripling of that number probably is an underestimate. I mean, we have to work on these numbers further, but at least a tripling of that number. So that means if you're going to try to do this in 7, 8, 9 years, you're talking about needing to put 150,000 plus students into 380,000 in the country. Machinists. That's what I said, didn't I? Okay. That one I got right. Okay. 380,000. So if we're going to triple that number, you know, to over 1 million, okay, then we're going to need to train something like 150,000. This is a 2-year program. You're going to need to be bringing in 150,000 students a year to come out the other side in 7 or 8 years with that kind of workforce as an initial burst. Now that's just machinists. But here, let me just give you a little summary of what a machinist actually does, because I think it's useful just because it kind of demystifies. Okay, first, a machinist made in the U.S. Navy goes to a special school for 9 weeks of specialized training, and then gets on the job training. Now, on the job training. Okay, after 9 weeks specialized training, you're going into a hull of a ship, and you're going to be working on every component, every aspect of the machinery that powers that ship and sustains it, right? In the hull of that ship. That's on the job training. Now, the Navy won't even put you into a master mate program without you committing right off the dot, before they even put you into the program, to 5 years. They're not going to waste the time and energy and so forth that it takes to train a master mate machinist. without that 5-year commitment. I mean, that just to give you, that's another window on it. But here let me just give you a sense of this. Today, CNC machine tools, working with CAD/CAM, is 90% in the setup work. That may be slightly a simplification, but that's the figure I was getting. 90% in setup.
What is CAD/CAM?
Computer-aided design, where you're using computers. You may be taking a blueprint. You may be taking a disk, and then you're taking that information, that data, and you're producing, on a computer, a 3-dimensional design of your prototype or the piece that you're going to be producing, right? Which, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that it comes out in the real world exactly the way it looks.
Right?
Yeah, right. So there's other aspects to it, but nonetheless, this is the 90% setup. That is, the machinist is given computer files to work with. They reference blueprints and sketches to create digital replicas that are then sent to the CNC machines. When starting a cutting project, they must make sure the cutting equipment is properly set up and the building materials, that is the material that you're going to be shaping, is properly secured. Once everything is ready, they start a cutting program, computer program, machine program, and monitor the progress to ensure nothing else goes wrong. That's what they do. So 90% of the work is setting it up, on a computer, right? And then fixing it to the machine tool, the 5-axis, 6-axis, 7. They're up to 7 axes now. Machine tools to then produce the physical product, right? So it's indoors, it's clean. It's not working in a shed, the way people think of, the machinists of old days. It was important work, but it was dirty work. And you're talking about incredible tolerances. You're talking about down to plus or minus 2/millionths of an inch, 0.0005 millimeter in terms of tolerances, in terms of fine machine tooling. But it's also the same with welders. I mean, you can get a welding degree, what's called architectural welding degree, with 6 or 9 months in terms of certification. Then you can go down and say to some guy, hey, hire me, here's my certification. But the guy will then tell you, okay, go over there and I want you to do the following weld. And then he'll inspect how you do that weld. He wants to know that you have more than a piece of paper, right? But that's only a start. A structural welder is just, basic welding. If you're going to go up the line, plasma arc, electron beam, and laser welding, these are all, utilized. I mean, aerospace applications, you're working with metal, it's not thick, it's 0.015 of an inch thick. If you do a bad weld, you're going to just destroy, you're going to create a disaster, right? You're dealing with very fine tolerances. So the skill levels, I'll just quote here, welding is integral to the manufacture of a wide range of products. This course provides the practical and theoretical knowledge required to become a welding engineer and a materials and joining specialist. The course covers modern welding techniques, automation, metallurgy, materials science, welding processes, weld design, and quality. So all of these, think of electrician, even think of a machinist. A machinist has got to keep machine tools, not machinist, a mechanic. A mechanic also includes the people that have got to keep the machine tools operating, heavy equipment operating. If you're building, you're at infrastructure projects, you got to have mechanics that are skilled at working on these big machines and keep them moving, right? So the skill levels are going up in all of these areas. What used to be considered semi-skilled work. Oh, my dad's a mechanic. My dad's a carpenter. These things are just climbing in terms of what the requirements are, and that's going to increase in a Artemis generation, in a generation that's grappling with ever improving, rapidly transforming technologies. Fusion energy. What are going to be the byproducts of fusion energy in terms of material science, lasers, the fusion torch we know about. But what is this going to mean in terms of what somebody's got to know coming out of a machine shop, or machine school, right? Or any other area of productive labor. And of course, more and more they're going to be scientists more than technicians, but this is a process. So this is an entire area. We're going to need financing. Kids can't go to these programs for nothing. There are inexpensive programs. There's a program at one of the HCC campuses. A student can start at Houston Community College. They can take the required courses, heavy in science, calculus, and so on and so forth. And they can move up and go to this campus out there on Westheimer. And they can enter a program and they can get a 4-year engineering degree for $16,000 total cost. But, if you're going to, this is a special program. I mean, this is how desperate these companies are to produce skilled workers. 2 years degrees. I mean, you have, you have these technologist degrees in mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering. These are 2-year degrees, right? Which you're not an engineer, but you're a technologist. You're a skilled person that's been trained to be integrated into the respective industries. All of these are there as fields, but they're going to have to be ramped up, and to be ramped up, the funding for them. So we're going to have programs like the National Defense Loan Program. We also are going to need to work with the private sector. There's a lot of apprenticeship programs, but they're very small. Companies are just hiring what they need, and they don't want to take a chance with raw labor. They're already looking for self-motivated, sharp kids, because they don't want to invest $25,000 to $75,000 training somebody to have accidents on the floor and crap going out the front door, as product, right? They've got to. So they're not, it's not exactly a cost-benefit analysis mentality, but it verges on that. So to have a breakout that we need in terms of crash program efforts on the labor side, we're going to have to incentivize these apprenticeship programs. We're also going to have to look at it from the standpoint of a peace dividend that is retooling the aerospace defense sector. If we, the defense budget of the U.S. is bigger than the entire rest of the world combined. What if that was cut in half? Not laying people off, but what if we did a systematic program of shifting portions of that labor over to the Moon-Mars project directly, but also into setting up other training programs, lots of skilled people. They could be teachers, trainers, and so on and so forth.
Those Navy guys you talked about.
yeah. There's a lot more that can be discussed, but I think I should wrap it there. I think I've covered enough. There's the fabrication laboratories. It's an interesting thing that came out of MIT, and they've spread all over the country. There's hundreds of them, hundreds and hundreds in the U.S. and Europe. There's several around here, right in the Houston area. Fab labs, which are where you have digital printing, you have circuit board making, you have, you have CNC machine tools, like this one at the Fab Lab that I showed you. Well, this one. They're set up in some high schools. They're set up in libraries now. In some libraries, they're set up in community centers. There's one, the Ripley House right out here, out towards Katy, has a Fab Lab set up in the Baker Ripley House Community Center. So they're out there, but as part of the so-called STEM, it doesn't get traction in the context of Moon-Mars, of the LaRouche, Kraft, Erica, Trump Moon-Mars program. It can. We can integrate it into a more systematic approach, which has to come from the federal level. That's just my final point. The CCC was organized from the top down. Willy-nilly, you can have all kinds of apprenticeship programs. Willy-nilly, you can have all kinds of community college programs. There's a lot out there. The machine training center at HCC Stafford right now is operating at 24% of its capacity. It could train 75% more students than it's got coming in the door right now. So there's capacity out there they could utilize. But to pull it together and then figure out what you have to expand where and how, and also then how to integrate it with the Space CC in terms of further upgrading these young men and women that are coming out of a 1.5 or 2 year program in a Space CC. That's going to require, top-down coordination. As we had with the WPA and the CCC, but also as we had it as the war effort geared up in the 1940s, late 30s into the 40s. Mark.
Brian, I don't want to rain on your parade. It's headed in a beautiful direction. I love it. But one thing you didn't mention with respect to the labor force and society in general that we didn't have to deal with at the time of Roosevelt is the enormous drug problem that exists in this country. Even the Marine Corps, which is full of highly motivated and idealistic types to achieve a specific mission, namely the defense of the country and the propagation of the Marine Corps itself, they have a tremendous disciplinary problem with substance abuse, and even thinking about getting these people out of prison. A lot of them are there, the majority I would say, are there for nonviolent drug offenses. So, the addiction problem in this country is getting worse rather than better with the legalization of marijuana in various jurisdictions. So how can we counteract that?
Well, first of all, let me just say it's subjective. It's a question of visionaries. We need visionaries. That's what Lynn was providing, Lyndon LaRouche. That's what Roosevelt provided. That's what Kennedy provided. Kraft Erica in a different mode provided. That's what we have to provide now. And we have to multiply the number of visionaries because you have to inspire people in a way that they're not inspired. We're also going to have to, I'm glad you're bringing this up, we're going to have to provide a whole cultural dimension, if you will, to these programs. The WPA had programs that, that involved theater groups, artists, and so forth. We're going to have to shape this so that it's at a higher level in terms of classical culture, classical cultural principles. We're going to have to integrate it. Every one of these camps should have a chorus and a maestro in terms of these Space CC camps, just as a matter of course. You can imagine traveling theater groups, going from camp to camp, or drawing on local community resources in terms of theater groups and so on and so forth, music groups and so on. So in science pedagogues, visiting, setting up what you used to call pedagogical museums in these camps, where you learn the basics of physical geometry and begin to open a window into the actual nature of the universe, the creative universe. So these are all going to be aspects. It's not going to be easy. It's also work. It's putting people to work where they're actually doing things. I mean, one of the things that's said about these training programs, like the machinist training programs, is once these young men and women, primarily men obviously, but it's completely open to women as well, get their hands in there, start building things, making things. That's an appeal of the Fab Labs. Then they get hooked because they're actually making changes, on nature for man, right? So you're utilizing, you're evoking a quality of mind which otherwise they haven't experienced. You can do that through beauty. You can do that through the utilization of those qualities in creative physical action. But in terms of a simple solution, I mean, we can't wave a magic wand, but we got to work with what we got.
But what they did with the CCC camps is that they drew those kids out of the ghettos that they lived in, out of the, backward culture and so forth that they lived in. And so if you set up something like that, housing for these young people, where all of that culture is available.
They say no video games, no drugs available, none of that.
Yeah, they'd be so busy, in terms of during the day working in the school context and then on the projects.
Intramural games.
No
drugs. The CCC camp, maybe I didn't say, but the CCC camps, to be an enrollee, that was the term. you had to be on relief. Your family had to be on relief, you know, so you know, so it was scraping the bottom of the barrel, and they weren't dragoon. They had to, you know, they had to seek out the programs and qualify, and then the $35 paycheck a month they got, 25 had to be sent back to the family. That was just required.
Wow.
So, but the impact of the program on the country, you know, in terms of a radiating effect, made it the most popular program in the nation at the time. Even though it was dealing with a, you know, down and out segment of the population. And it was projects that were out there in the Tuliberries. You know, it wasn't like people saw these projects, you know, on every street corner. But the impact was felt.
Yeah, Brian, just
Yeah.
a real quick comment. Most effective anti-drug program I ever participated in was up in Paterson, New Jersey, where they basically were set up in an old warehouse, and they had upholstery shops, they had all kinds of job situations, and you had an option when you went to court to go to prison or be paroled into this house. And it was this comprehensive kind of approach where it basically became the counseling, the work ethic, where you basically help the person reformulate his whole life. Obviously, it's a single project, but it's the same kind of thing culturally. The population has to
Yeah, it's a
take
good
things.
example.
You're not going to clear the drugs by trying to go after get them off drugs as a singularity. You got to have the whole, and you can put a national project together like that.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Brian, within next 5 years or 10 years, which sectors you think there will be a gap in employment? I mean, our kids, what kind of education or training they should, you know, try to get so they can get into the job market where there is a tremendous vacancy, you know.
If it's
You-
hard, if it's
So
hard,
you mentioned, you know,
that there's going to be there's a
machine
shortage.
learning.
Medicine, you
Yeah.
know, engineering,
Welding.
yeah, welding, machine.
Well, medicine, that's the problem. You know, you have to study at least for 8 years or 10 years before you become a medical professional. First, you have to get a bachelor's.
Well, yeah, in terms of a doctor, yeah, there's other.
But what, like you were mentioning, machinist or you know,
Sure.
welders, or these are specialists.
Well, again, see, look,
curriculum.
this goes to. I'm glad you bring it up in a different way. I'll answer it in a different way, maybe than the answer that you'd want. But it brings it right back to the question of LaRouche's 4 laws. I mean, in terms of the reorganization, we're heading into a crash right now. It's, you know, essentially it's on, and so that crash unfolding here. Look under the past 10 and 20 years, who would want to become a machinist in the oil and gas industry? You might have a job today, but 4 years from now you might not have any, you know, because of the boom bust cycles. And likewise, in terms of work at NASA, you know, the reason why the workforce in NASA is so old is because, you know, young people didn't want to join because there was no job security. I mean, you could get a start there, but yeah. I mean, right now in NASA, there's, you know, at the peak, there's 450,000 people working in NASA and NASA contracting companies at the peak of the moonshot. Now there's 17,000 in NASA itself, and there's 60,000 contractor employees. So 77, we went from 450,000 down to 77,000, you know. So I mean, to do the Moon Mars shot, or shots, or projects, you know, you're talking about multiplying that by several fold, at least up to the levels it was at before, even given that their technology has improved and so forth. We're to colonize Mars and so on, we're talking, this is much, much bigger than what was involved in getting to the project.
Actually,
But my point is
was-
that in all of these different areas, there's been these boom bust cycles. So there's been no reason, no secure, you can't raise a family. You know, become a machinist so I can get a stable job, raise a family in Katy or, you know, wherever, inside the loop, doesn't matter. But the point is, you know, There has been no, look at the Midwest, what's happened to the Midwest of the United States, right? So we have to create the conditions, we have to take, it's not going to happen just magically. We have to ensure that the stable conditions are created for financing that grow the actual physical economy of the United States. And then from that standpoint, you can begin to answer your questions in terms of where are the labor shortages? Well, some of them are already been pointed out and have been pointed out for years, and we're going to have to get a lot more effective and invest a lot more nationally in getting those positions filled. And then there's others, including medicine. I mean, people talk about, you know, Medicare for all. Well, you know, that's not going to work. First of all, it's not going to work because there's not enough doctors. I mean, to provide adequate Medicare in the United States, we need a lot more doctors than we got right now. A lot more. My doctor works at UT Physicians, and he has 5,000 patients. 5,000 patients that he's teaching part-time. I mean, you know, his patients can't see him. You know, I mean, they have to make an appointment 3 months, 4 months in advance. But he's got on paper, he's got 5,000 patients on his load.
Very important point.
You know, you know, there's not enough doctors and nurses, and so we have to, you know, we have to multiply.
It's
So
10 years to, you know, once you start college, 8 to 10 years actually when you begin practicing as an MD. So
Get started.
but it everywhere else it's like 5 years in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, you know, like 5 years of medical degree.
I was
and
just
then-
using that as an example. You know, what I've laid out 2-year programs. 2-year programs can create productive people that at today's wage levels make 40, 45, 50,000 a year. That's what a machinist makes. Bottom, you know, kind of starting 40,000 a year. But the point is, he's got to have job security to raise a family and so forth for it to really, you know, pay off. And a lot of kids need help financially to pay for the tuition. Even if they're living at home, they need some help because it's a full-time training program. It'd be hard to be working a regular job. And I mean, there is work. You know, there's these combined programs where you're working and studying, but that's a longer drawn process. That's not going to be couldn't be the main driver for the kind of thing that we need as a nation.
Start them out as EMTs in a work-study program, get the fundamentals down, advance them to paramedic, et cetera.
Okay.
You know, I mean, there's so many hours at a classroom, so many hours of work in the field. It can be done.
Mm-hmm.
It can be done. It has been done. The Chinese used to have what they call barefoot doctors, and I imagine that as the means to improve their education came along, these barefoot doctors gradually became shod.
My dad was
you
a
know.
medic during World War II. You know, he was trained as a medic.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't have any medical background. He was trained as a medic. We know other medics. Grauerholtz, yeah, LaRouche was a medic. Lyndon LaRouche was a medic during World War II. John Grauerholtz, you know, he's passed now, but he was a medic in Vietnam, and then he came back and got his doctor's degree, right? As an example of.
I've met a lot of people in their generation, in Lynn's generation before, who worked on CCC and WPA, you know, and became engineers without ever going to college and having productive careers.
Yep.
That's good. I just wanted to point out this movie, documentary rather, that was encouraged. That's called When We Were Apollo. I don't know if you had a chance to see it.
We were talking about seeing it.
Yeah. We should
Produced by
actually-
young producers, a new generation of producers.
Yeah,
were involved
and it
in.
was mainly dealing with, I mean, I think it's even better than like the Apollo 11 movies and so forth. The main thing it is dealing with is exactly what you're talking about. You know, the question of, you know, it wasn't necessarily called a CCC program for space, but you have people who were just like when Kennedy had made his announcement that everybody knew this was a national mission. Everybody had to take part. It wasn't just like for the highfalutin people who were into space, but that they were saying the people who were wielding the rockets out onto the launch pad or testing the construction workers. They didn't see this just as an 8 to 5 job. They were there just like the engineers and so forth, working long 12, 15 hours. They wanted to get it done. One thing that really struck me is just in terms of looking for this new talent, this young talent. You had a young guy said, I was going to a science fair and I had my display rocket at the science fair, and I didn't really know anything. I just wanted to do it for fun. And he was just saying that some people came around from NASA at that time, before it was called NASA, going into NASA anyway, and said, young man, we want you to join our program. And he was just like, they were willing, he was blown away. He said they were willing to train me. I didn't have the training that was needed at that time. The other thing that really struck me is a lady who was now a lady who was remembering back that she heard about the space program, and she said she already had 2 kids. Her 2 kids were already school age. Anyway, she said, I want to do that. I want to do something with the space program too. And she was married, and her husband told her, what do you know how to do? You can't do anything like that. And she said, watch me, I'll show you. And then she went in and started at a low level, joined the space program. Actually, her husband left her. She ended up getting a divorce and having to raise 2 girls on her own. But she went through the program, started to work with IBM, and became one of the top level communications people in the program. And she just said that, as many of the people expressing their experience, that program unified the nation and changed people's lives in a way that, the emotion around it was so profound, so enormous. It's a beautiful little video there. But it just shows you, like you said, this can't be a willy-nilly thing, and obviously everybody's not going to say, oh, this is great, let's give everybody this opportunity, because at the same side you're going to have your opposition to that. Don't think that Franklin Roosevelt, just like John F. Kennedy, didn't have opposition to his program, to their programs, because most people don't want to see people succeed in this way. They rather see people crawling in the dirt than to actually have access to something beautiful and profound. But anyway, that's a good movie, but I think what you're saying.
What was the name of the movie again, just to make sure we get it across
We
here?
were Apollo.
We were Apollo.
We were
When?
Apollo.
When we were.
Oh, when we were
That's
Apollo.
right.
All right.
Yeah, it's good. But,
Documentary film out there.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Available
On
on
Amazon.
Amazon, I noticed.
Amazon,
Yeah.
yeah.
Available on Amazon.
Mhm.
$3.
$3 on Amazon.
Oh, it's
Okay.
free if you're on Prime.
There you go.
Yeah, but you're paying
Okay.
$15 for that.
Right.
Right, there you go.
Yes.
If you're a subprime, it's
All my friends, and all my relatives, they're still at a loss of in which direction they should guide their children. A lot of people from the subcontinent diaspora, of course, they're forcing their children to study medicine, because that's that's something they think it's a sure shot. Once you actually reach there, you cross all the hurdles, then you'll have a good career.
Right.
I got, yeah.
I
Better
have a
than
comment on that.
better than a career as
What
an
are the
undertaker.
careers-
That's also a guarantee.
No, what are the careers you think will be good? I mean,
Peter, do you have some?
Well, I have a comment. Because I think that there's a certain thing missing there, Syed, and that's that those people should be fighting for the policies that we represent. That's the most important thing for them to do, because if they do that, they will see a plethora of pathways for their children to get ahead. But if we don't have these programs, it's all going to be hell.
Yeah.
So they got to fight for what we're doing, and that's going to make it possible for them to choose a career path for their families. That's because that's the really
for
issue.
the next generation.
For the next generation.
Fight
Yeah.
now for the next generation.
Right.
Fight now.
Exactly.
I remember back in the 80s, it's sort of like the question of where do I put my money? Where do I put my money? And Lynn said, find a small fusion research company, privately owned. And and help them.
Yeah, right.
Or find your local LPAC and contribute.
Yeah. Join
Yeah.
us.
I want to say something about the campus offensive in this context, because that's going to be part of it.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Do you want to come up here and say something about the campus? Keisha Rogers.
Well, I want to say something about it in the context of what was just asked, because I mean, I think that's the problem that we're facing right now, is that people are trying, where is the safe zone going to be? Where is it? Where is the niche going to be that I know I can be comfortable, I can make the money? And there's no shortcuts. There's no like, we're going to make a bunch of money. Because first of all, the point is what Brian brought up earlier too. You're not going to do this, what he's just presented, without having a shift and overhaul of the bankrupt financial system. And people who want to make quick money and going along with the monetary system, it's just not going to work. But I think the key thing, first of all, I'll just say on what we're doing to mobilize the population, because we're talking about young people, we're talking about CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, and one, you're going to have to take some of the skilled workers out of training, as said, who are already a little bit older, because the young people can't just train themselves. But then also, what are we going to do to actually go out and find these younger people? Well, particularly what we're doing right now, or especially around this report that people, I don't have one in front of me, right, but I'll point it up again, have seen, is we're taking this optimistic, the truth spark for changing the culture. Moon Mars, we commit to the Moon Mars mission. We're out on the streets at table deployments. As many people know, you've seen us there. Tax office, post offices, one of the key places. We just had a deployment here, and we're about to unleash an international campaign, not just in the United States university campuses, but also internationally in Ibero-America, other places in Europe and so forth, and hit the campus with this perspective, unifying nations of the world around a common commitment to a Moon Mars mission. So one thing I know, our team in organizers in Manhattan and the New York area, they've already mapped out something like 10 to 14 campuses. What we're asking people to do is, if you really want to join and see the importance and the optimism and inspiration that this can spread, as we did with a preliminary deployment we had here on the campus, we did last week at the University of Houston. We set up there. There were about 4 of us that went out, but enormous response in terms of people wanting to know, hey, how are we going to get this done, or wanting to just know about the Artemis program that has been announced by the president, and sending as Brian said, first woman, next man to the moon. But also they saw that as, okay, you guys aren't out here talking about the race, president being a racist, or all of this negativity that's going on. And people who were signing up were just like, yeah, this is so inspiring to see that people are out here actually talking about something real, like policy solutions, not talking about how to divide us. And I had one young man jump out of the car. He was being dropped off for his classes. What are you guys talking about? I saw this. You have a Artemis program. You have about going to the moon. This is exciting. He got out of the car. He was supposed to be going to his class. He came up to our table and he wanted to know what was going on. And I mean, this was, I just say, this was a young African-American guy, and he said, this crap that they're doing in terms of the news media, dividing people, all of the negativity that's going on, putting the racism and so forth, this doesn't do anything for us. And so, I mean, you had things like that, and we are really trying to get a beat, should we say, a clear understanding on what is really going on, what's the thinking of the population, what are they looking for, and you have to be out there actually getting that true reading of what's going on in the population. And I think the campuses are very important. And I will say this from personal experience, from running congressional campaigns and so forth in the past, that people have no clue. They really miss the beat on, thinking that they already have a fixed understanding. Oh, the young people, don't worry about them, they're already lost. But if the young people are lost, the nation is lost. That's the problem. So if you don't save your young people and your youth, and this is why Lyndon LaRouche put so much effort into the recruitment of youth and younger people. So I would encourage people in the room listening on the broadcast, wherever you may be, learn more about what you can do to get involved, especially joining us and going out to the campuses, recruiting younger people. And I mean, right now, we're not just talking about campuses, because school is too expensive. People can't even afford to go to the campuses. So young people are everywhere. So let's get them motivated. And I mean, what Brian just laid out is a beautiful vision for, and particularly the life's work and commitment of what LaRouche has been fighting for in our organization to being implemented right now. Because if we keep going the direction we're going, it's not going to be pretty. I'll just say that. So.
We wrap there. Okay.